next I pass to Tazli.
Right. So before we proceed, I'm going to talk only a little bit on the formative assessment. But again, we're going to revisit back Mentimeter. Actually, I really love to use Mentimeter, even actually during the engagement session online, because this is where actually we can give some kind of feedback. So first of all, maybe I would like to ask the question, why formative assessment is important? So use the same code and respond to your comment. Okay, so we have plenty of feedback here. Why formative assessment is important? One is to provide feedback for student learning, to help students in their understanding, as a medium of feedback to students, because it gives flexibility to measure what students really learn since their capacity are varies. Provide another way to suit the nature of the subject, systematic way to assess students. It tells the teacher how far the students understand so the teacher can give feedback. Here is to scaffold the student scale, for students learning CPI, for student understanding, to check the progress. I think all the answers are here actually, because as we all know that formative assessment is usually it's not graded. We don't give marks to formative assessment, but most importantly, like we give as a medium for feedback to our students. As we know that actually we in online platform, if let's say we are conducting a face-to-face class, we can use a simple approach, something like think, pair, share. You know, but how does actually we convert the activity like think, pair, and share online, right? So there is another question that I would like to ask you. What can you name some of the online tools suitable for formative assessment? What are the suitable tools that you can use to give feedback to the students? So you can see that again, I think many of you have known that there are a lot of tools that you can use for formative assessment, so which is easily find. Sometimes it is free to use. I think you have underwent several courses before that expose you to this kind of platform, right? So may I ask you another question? What is the best way to use this tool? Can you give example? Like if let's say you want to use Padlet for what? You want to use Kahoot for what? Can anybody share with me some example? So here you can see that a lot of you use all this format as all these online tools as quizzes, and then also give improvement, comment for improvement, giving multiple choice questions. Then you incorporate collaborative learning, and then reflection. So I think these are the examples of actually how the online tools can be used, can be done effectively. Because I know that most of us, many of us, we know that there are plenty of platforms, but sometimes we may not we may forgot may not the way how to use it. Of recent, actually, I discovered that in Telegram you can create quiz as well as poll. And I actually noticing that some of my students, when I did the survey, speed test survey, I found that about out of 170 of my students, nearly 40 to 50 of the students have bandwidth low than the average Malaysian speed bandwidth, which is about less than 5.4 megabyte per second. I think about 10 to 15 having less than 512 kilobyte per second. So which means that I have to resort of using certain kind of low bandwidth technology. Okay, so one of the example that I could share with you is when actually I start to use Telegram. So I want to show with you the Telegram here on how actually just want to see whether you see the Telegram or not. All right, here. So this is the Telegram groups for my students, which I created purposely. I mean, of recently when there is this MCO coming in. So what I did is actually I started to give question. For example, like because I'm teaching material and energy balance, and my part is on the energy balance. So we give a questions, and then I ask my students to respond that night, and then the next day I will address to their concern. So they respond to this, they respond to the poll, and basically I address back those particular polls and I give whether they are giving the right answer or not. And then there are some further discussions that is happening inside the group. There are also some students who actually ask ask outside of the group. But I always trying to bring them back to the group and pose the question inside the group, because this is the way how it could benefit other students. Because usually and then the most important part is to emphasize to the students that there is no such thing as a stupid question. So whatever ambiguity that you have, just pose it in the group, because if I don't answer that, somebody else within the group would answer you. So this is actually just to promote social learning, so that everyone is supporting each other per se. So we can see that there are actually plenty of platform, for example, here that you can use. I can see that many of you have shared the use of Padlet, Mentimeter, Telegram, Socrative. It's actually, in my opinion, when we are doing formative assessment, it's more importantly that the students get it right. It doesn't have to be that all the students have to compulsory participate in answering everything, because some of the students can be some kind of passive learner. So for example, in my Telegram groups, sometimes I responded via voice message. So what they did is actually, even if let's say they do not come during that time, they do not listen to the next time, but it is becoming their reference for their own learning. So at later time, they'll be able to listen back to whatever comment that I put in, or read the comment that I put in. So that's the idea of formative assessment. You don't have to actually force everyone to use it, but at least if let's say you have 10% or 20% within the group who actively participate and curate the knowledge together with you, I think that is sufficient enough. So that is why I think I like the use of the Telegram or WhatsApp group during this particular time, because it has a low bandwidth. And as you know, constantly throughout this session, I've been using Mentimeter. So sometimes I ask some of you to give feedback and share whatever things that you know. So this is through Mentimeter. Padlet, I also use it for reflection purpose. And sometimes I use Socrative or any kind of post just for the sake of getting the feedback, to get to know whether they do understand or not. So the next thing that I would like to share with you is about flip assessment. Okay, all right. So what does it mean by flip assessment? Before that, I would like to talk a little bit on the characteristic of surface learners. Okay, many of us, if let's say we start to see in our class, if let's say they ask question, for example, sir, is it coming in the exams? Sir, how can I easily remember this? And sometimes when we come up with test questions or exam questions, and then they will complain outside of the hall, I think the lecturer didn't teach this at all. Okay, and then they are very exam oriented because of the education system that has been exposed to. So these are the nature or characteristic of a surface learner, because they always wanted to be dependent on you. Okay, so if let's say they say they are on the dualism stage, they wanted only what is right and what is wrong, and they would just say the lecturer is the source of knowledge for you. Okay, but another surface learner stage is when actually they said, okay, you are right, but but also the others are right as well. Okay, all opinions are equal as well. They cannot make their own judgment. But whenever that they have reached to the stage that, okay, what I'm doing is correct and I have this reason why I'm doing this correct. So this is where actually they started to become a deep learner. So the idea of giving flip assessment. All right, I would like to ask you again, actually, what do you think about flip assessment? Okay, so some assessment that makes students think, assess first, then teach the students, assessment conducted by students, getting students to find out the answer, then discuss later. Okay, students make question and schema. Students learn first about the topic. Okay, so let's have a look here. So what I mean is by actually flip assessment is when actually students think like lecturer. Do you recall the experience that when we were the students last time, the undergraduate students, we are not also as clever as our lecturer, right? Because we are just being given questions and we just need to answer. And when we start to become a lecturer, we feel that we know more than what actually when we learn as a student, because we have to teach, right? And then when you were asked actually by the faculty or by the department, you need to develop an exam question for the students, a close-ended exam question. So what happened to that kind of experience? We have actually to spend a lot of time, right? I mean, you have to read, if let's say you want to get one question come up from the textbook, then you need to revise that whole chapter so you understand first. Only then you'll be able to come up with the questions. Am I right? So this is where actually I call it flip assessment. It's different from the flip classroom. Okay, it's totally different with flip classroom. Flip assessment is where actually students think like the lecturer. So instead of students answering questions, they actually develop exam questions with complete solution. What is the advantage for us as a lecturer? When we assess this, we have a bank of questions for the future close-ended exam. So that is one thing that we could do. Okay, so what is the methodology in order to do this? So first of all, we start with giving the role of the students to the students. For example, like we actually develop kind of certain kind of case study. Students are given role as faculty members to set up final exam questions for a specific learning outcome. So you have some kind of learning outcome, or you have certain kind of chapter that you want to address. So these are the chapter that the instruction that you give to the student. So additionally, you must mention to the students that, okay, this must be an original questions and solution, and then say that I want it to be 70% of it should be of high Bloom taxonomy level. Okay, maybe level 3 to 6 or 4 to 6. And then you give them some instruction, some reading about Bloom taxonomy, so that they'll be able to see which particular guide word they could include in that. And then they may encourage to use analogy or daily application or an industry related process. The tricky part is actually they must prepare a complete solution, which include the derivation and step-by-step solution to the final answer. And of course, you need to ask them to produce a closed book format kind of exam. And we advise them not to prepare too many guided sub-questions, as guided question may bring the level of taxonomy towards low-order thinking. Here, what is the catch part here is that when actually we give this kind of instruction to the students, in order for them to come up with questions, they need to practice. They need to study on their own first. They need to do their own calculation. Only that they'll be able to come up with the solution. Okay, so here, this is also we need to develop good rubric. So for example, in my case, I usually assess them in terms of the originality. So this, we ask them to submit through Turnitin, and then we give them in terms of the solution, whether it's a step-by-step hierarchical following the systematic way of solving it. And then we have some formatting, for example, language, you want to evaluate that. And then on the HOTS, high order thinking skills, to what extent that their questions is actually a hot question. Okay, so I usually give this as part of my take-home test for my students. And of course, the duration that I always give is about 2 weeks, for example, because I know that the students may need to take sometimes, they need to have some, kena dapat ilham dulu kan. So only then they be able to come up with a good question. So the assignments that I give this is example of the assignments. This is related to reaction engineering. I taught them reaction engineering before. And then because I mentioned that I don't want it to be first order reversible reaction, I want it to be second order. So and then I asked them, you may include analogy to the daily application or any industry related process instead of typical A plus B goes to C plus D. And then there are also some other instruction here. Okay, so these are one of the example of the questions that come up from the students. Okay, and then they produce a complete calculation here, and then he makes his own story from that, and then this is where actually we give them marks, whether it is good or not. Okay, so these students is giving he got 94 out of 100 in preparing this question. So I also did some kind of survey just to see whether how does the students dealing with this, and many of them said that this assignment allow them to revise the whole chapter. Okay, and then majority of them also said that it give them a deeper understanding on the related chapter. But it depends on the constraint that they face. Sometimes they said they are having limited creativity, but at the same time maybe limited time to complete because of the other assignments. But I have done something similar much earlier, during this MCO period, and I give it to my first year students. I didn't share the result here, but they also said that it gave them some insight of how actually to develop good questions, and then it allowed them to revise the chapter on their own. So these are some of the reflection from the students. They said that I think it is good for students to practice. They need to fully understand and the topic to create question about it. By hook or by crook, they need to understand the topic very well. Now the students said that it is an interesting method of learning, and then some of the students say it is not bad at all. Okay, and then the student will complain it is hard and all that, but in the end of the day, the knowledge matters. And then one of the students say, I love the idea of take-home test, but I'm not that creative. Okay, so the students actually need to figure out by themselves how they could come up with a good question. So yes, for this activity, do I give formative assessment? Yes, I do give some kind of scaffolding to the students. I give scaffolding to the students to make sure that the students answered, I mean, some kind of questions, some kind of exercise for them, so that they can do on their own before they come up with the questions. Okay. So this is some findings, like before we did any kind of flip assessment, so we can see that in terms of the average of the students has moved, it has skewed a bit to the left in terms of their own performance. Okay, so that's all. I think I'm passing it back to Prof. Khairiyah for this.
Okay.